Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Community Breakfast of the Mainline Undoing Racism Day. Our event this year is presented with CoSaTIDE. Here's an overview of today's program, and we'll proceed through the programming, finish our time at 10:30 this morning. I'll be giving some pre-program notes. Just want to welcome you all and hope you enjoy and learn this morning. This year's Undoing Racism Day event is held and dedicated to the memory of Peggy Gaskins. And how do you characterize a friend? I did the best that I could. Humble servant of God, joyful activist, and mentor to so many of us. And I have 3 photographs to show you to just try to begin to capture Peggy. This is at the 2010 dedication of the Bishop Richard Allen Park in Bryn Mawr. And Peggy is to the right on the side there, and was instrumental in making that happen and instrumental in the founding of the Undoing Racism Day. Peggy is here in the center of the choir singing "I Need You to Survive." She recommended that song. And then here she is in 2018 at the NAACP annual luncheon. We want to thank our event sponsors, the continued support of our event sponsors, Villanova University, St. Thomas of Villanova Parish, Bryn Mawr Trust Company, and Radnor Township. Grateful for that continued support. And thank you to our faith community sponsors, Bethel Ardmore, AME Church of Ardmore, Central Baptist Church, St. Luke United Methodist Church, and St. Mary's Episcopal Church. Thank you very much. Thank you to our graphic designer, Stephanie Patience, who designed our flyer this year and made us all look really good. The event's being recorded for future uses, and your continued participation indicates you agree to have your image recorded and shared. Thank you. Our Zoom etiquette is to have our microphones, or for you all to have your microphones and cameras off during the panel discussion. It makes the Zoom software work better, so we appreciate your cooperation. And these are our ground rules for dialogue. They are from Dr. Terry Nance of Villanova University. And by participating today, that indicates that you will abide by these ground rules for dialogue. Thank you very much. Our timekeeper today is Colin Mccrawson. Colin is our inaugural scholar in residence. He's studying a master's degree in history at Villanova University, and he's going to be our timekeeper. So you'll see him signaling for the moderator and the panelists, and this will help us very much to keep on schedule so we can hear from all of the panelists as much as possible. And now I'm going to turn the program over to Professor Chambers, who will be introducing Reverend Waller and then walking us through the rest of the program. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Sean Chambers. I'm really glad to be here again with you all. I want to thank Ann and Reverend Carolyn and Diana and Geeti and Susan and Chuck and the others at Community Breakfast Collaborative for continuing this fantastic Undoing Racism Day and this great breakfast. I want to introduce our speaker who will open the program with a prayer, a native of Cleveland, Ohio, with Virginia roots too, like me, Reverend Dr. Alyn E. Waller has pastored Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church almost 30 years. Enon has 3 services and 2 locations in the Mount Airy and Wissahickon sections of Philadelphia with over 15,000 members. He's a highly sought after revivalist, vocalist, and lecturer. He's married to Dr. Ellen Jo Waller and dad to 2 daughters, Morgan and Erica, and he's a granddad. He's got a music CD and he's authored 3 books, one of which is available on our Community Breakfast website. Reverend Waller's team at the church has been a tremendous resource, from sponsoring youth sports and cheerleading teams to providing health and wellness initiatives that offer AIDS testing and COVID testing and other critical health screenings. During the 3 years I've spent as one of his parishioners at Enon, Pastor's abiding faith has been inspirational, and so is his commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and youth empowerment within his church throughout Philadelphia and on the main line. Listen, 1 Timothy 4:12 says, "Don't let anyone think less of you because you are young. Be an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live your life, in your faith and in purity." Timothy was a young pastor, and it would have been easy for older Christians to look down on him because of his youth. Regardless of your age, Pastor Waller has taught many in his church, God can use you. Live so others can see the divinity in you. And I mention all this because, again, Pastor Waller's conveyed this message to men my age and members of Enon of all ages. Reverend Waller's an educated man, a wise man, and like Timothy has been a young pastor who's been as active as the youth on this call that he's about to pray with and for. He's earned his BS in music business from Ohio University, an MDiv from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, a D-Min in Ministry to Marriage and Family from Palmer Theological Seminary, and an honorary doctorate from Lincoln University. And I turn things over to Reverend Waller now to lead us in prayer. Thank you so much for being here, Pastor Waller.
Thank you, Brother Chambers. Thank all of you for all that have brought us all together. Let's pray together. God, we thank you for creating us. We thank you for calling us. We thank you for this moment where we are to interact with you and with each other. We thank you even for the challenge of undoing racism, for even in the challenge, we are going to grow, we're going to build community, and ultimately, we're going to win. Thank you for this discussion. Thank you for all of the various ways that we will grow today. Now we ask, Lord, that you bless this moment, that everything that happens will be fruitful for our individual and collective walk together. I ask this prayer in the name that is significant to me with respect to all, the name of Christ, we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Well, this program is especially fantastic for all of us because it's youth-led, and I'm going to turn it over to Anika Jaswal to begin facilitating this event. And Anika, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Chambers. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Minakazi and Undoing Racism Day organizers for putting together this wonderful time of reflection and interaction and providing a platform for all of us to learn from one another. Since we're short on time, I'm going to quickly introduce myself and then get our panelist event started. As you all can see from my Zoom name, my name is Anika. I go by the pronouns she, her. I'm a senior at Radnor High School and the founder of CoSaTIDE, which stands for Council of Students Advocating for Transparency, Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. Our organization works to ensure efficacy and transparency in high school diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and works to empower minority student voices. We're currently comprised of 7 schools in the greater Philadelphia area, and we're super thankful to be part of the community breakfast event today. Now, getting into our event, early on last year, and I'm sure we all paid attention to this, we got all kinds of statements from districts stating their mission to fight bigotry and create equitable and inclusive educational environments, kind of like this idea of fighting in solidarity with minority groups. So the question on the table for this morning is why transparency is necessary in diversity, equity, and inclusion policy within schools. I'm grateful to be joined by 7 distinguished and engaging panelists today. So since we're short on time, we're going to jump right into the questions. What I'm going to ask from the panelists is to please say your name and the school you go to or the organization you're affiliated with when I ask this first question. You'll have 2 minutes to answer each question, and because of time, you will be cut off at the 2-minute mark. I'd like to start with a broad opening question of how are we describing a system that is deemed to be systemically racist? And for students specifically, how is a dominantly white culture impacting your school and classroom environment? So I'll start off with Reverend Waller. If you could please tell us your name and organization that you're affiliated with.
My name is Colin Waller, and I am the senior pastor of the Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church. I actually grew up in Shaker Heights, Ohio, and Cleveland, Ohio. And yeah, that's me.
And the question is, how are we describing a school system that is deemed to be systemically racist?
Well, I think that how am I describing it?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Systemic racism is not merely personal prejudice. It is when the accumulation of norms lean in one direction, which for many of us is not in our direction. And so what I understand systemic racism is when the norms are derived from a Eurocentric reality that assumes universalism. And when that assumption causes us not to consider others that are not from that cultural context.
Awesome. Thank you, Reverend Waller. We're going to move on to Aïsatta. So the same question, how are you describing a school system that is deemed to be systemically racist, but also how does a dominantly white culture impact your classroom?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Aïsatta Koné, and I'm a junior at Strath High School. To answer your question, Anika, personally, I believe that a systematically racist school is an institution that inherently negatively affects its students of color. When I say inherently, I mean that racism is natural in the classroom scene, in administrative decisions, and in everyday aspects of school. A racist curriculum, racist dialogue when teaching students of color opposed to white students, and even blatantly racist traditions are all examples of what I deem to be a systematically racist school. Now, personally, experiencing racism in my school district has been a challenge as I did not grow up in this school district. I've been in and out of different school districts besides the Wallingford-Swarthmore School District, which is the district that Strathaven is in. But as previously stated, I believe that a systematically racist institution entails in a sense of normalization of racism in the day-to-day classroom experience. And the dominantly white culture of my school has resulted in a normal microaggressive environment between the curriculum and the level of courses the Black students are being forced into. The dominant white culture at my school has intended to hold me down. Now, fortunately, it hasn't been successful. In order to get to my honors and AP classes, I had to take extra notes, extra courses, extra tests, and multiple placement tests just to get into the classroom to be asked if I'm in the right place. Frustrating? Yes, but it's what I need to do to work around the oppressive school system I attend.
Thank you, Aïsatta. So now we'll move on to Namrta.
Thanks, Anika. Hi, guys. I'm Namrta. I'm a senior at Conestoga High School. And as for your question, Anika, I'm going to start with the first one. So for me, a systematically racist school can be defined really well by example. So for me personally, it looks like helping other fellow students of color deal with racist incidents or remarks that they experience or that they were a victim to because there is no system set up to help. It looks like pointing out textbooks that are offensive, degrading, or just historically inaccurate. It looks like an all-white guidance and mental health counselor staff, and a school DEI team like we do here have at Conestoga is a couple of students and teachers, but that's not enough to help every student who needs it sorry. It's not enough to help every student who needs it. And the fact that no structure or system has been set up to help these students of color shows me a systematically racist school. And that's built off of personal experience. I know that Aïsatta didn't grow up here in this school district, but I did. And through middle school, elementary school, and now high school, I have experienced the same kind of systemically racist schooling. For your second question, for how dominantly white culture has impacted me, it's a lot. I'm Desi, so my parents are from India, and so I fit into that Asian stereotype of the model minority myth, but I'm not interested in STEM career and that kind of stuff. I'm more interested in a liberal arts kind of career, and that came as a big surprise to a lot of my teachers and people in school that were, like guiding me throughout my journey. And so I was still pushed to take AP classes and science classes.
Thank you, Namrta. So now we're going to move on to Ian Sun.
Hello, my name is Ian, and I'm a junior at Radnor High School. And for the first question, how are we describing a school system that is deemed to be systemically racist? When we are describing a school system that's deemed systemically racist, one thing we're describing is a school system that disproportionately funds schools based on the racial demographics, which affects the quality of education of students in these schools. It is well known that majority white schools are better funded than schools with a majority people of color population. But what other effects does it have? It means that the curriculum in the white schools have a better quality and are more up to date, while those in schools of color are more outdated. It means that the infrastructure of white schools are better developed, meaning students never have to worry about things like the temperature, the cleanliness, the school environment, things like that. And in the end, these things create educational inequalities, which ultimately translates to more job and college opportunities for whites and less of those for people of color. And for the fifth question about how does a predominantly white culture affect students of color, and like Namrta said, I'm Asian, but more specifically, I'm East Asian, I'm Chinese. So my experience will be different from Aïsatta's. But a dominant white culture still has effects on Asians as well. Like Namrta said, the model minority myth means that we're pressured to take high-level AP honors courses just so we can fit into this stereotype of the model minority myth. And not only that, the model minority myth just basically portrays us Asians as musical prodigies, walking calculators, basically just smarter and overachievers overall. And while this sounds like a good stereotype, it puts undue burden on Asian Americans to succeed and achieve a lot. And I do mean it, a lot.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ian. Now we're going to move on to Dr. Stevenson.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to participate in this this annual breakfast. Coming from two lenses, one as an educator and one as a community member representing local needs and community. I think that the big issue on all of these, I would classify it is that the need for us to find using education as a platform to create a vessel of bringing folks together. Once you identify the needs, whether it's microaggressions, macroaggressions, racism or anything associated to whether it's a student of color, student of disabilities, a student that anyone is classified of historically underrepresented, that is the responsibility of that community and that school to put procedures and supports in place that allows those students, their families across all spectrum to feel that they are included, that they are welcome and that they're a part of it. Whether it's as simple as putting together a support plan showing the families how to, if there is a discrimination issue, that they go through the procedures, that they have an administrator, moving up to have those appeals, or is it put student support groups in place to make them feel a part of that society, to put education and professional development for the staff. All of those things are important to have the end goal to identify when there is an issue and to put those supports in place to ensure that all students across the board feel that they are invited, welcome, and a part of that community.
Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. We're going to move on next to Hannah Baumgardner.
Good morning, everyone. So to answer Anika's question, I believe that a systemically racist school system is a system that openly targets minority students. The system gives little room for students of color to flourish, ultimately leaving them at a disadvantage economically and educationally. In fact, students of color are suspended and expelled 3 times more often than white students. Repeated suspensions and expulsion rates create higher dropout rates that channel students directly into the criminal justice system. In some larger US counties with a broad footprint, there are schools with predominantly white students and predominantly students of color. These schools with majority minority students are chronically underfunded. In those schools, students regularly have less experience and are given unlicensed teachers. For the remaining students, the idea of college gets further away until it's at that point just gone. This, to me, is systemic racism. And to touch on Anika's question about being in a predominantly white community, as said by Aïsatta earlier, predominantly white culture does result in an accepted microaggressive environment. This is a perceived racial privilege and position in the social structure. In some predominantly white neighborhoods, there are preconceived notions about how, well, I'm speaking on behalf of African Americans, but how African Americans should and do act, sort of like low-hanging expectations placed on the entire community. And when said student isn't Black enough and doesn't fit into the stereotype of what being Black is, they become a pariah. So these are my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And last but not least, we'll be moving on to Alana for this question.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Alana. So over the past year, I think that I've been given an opportunity to look deep within the news and the different school systems that we have in place to really understand the disparities that exist between education and issues particularly surrounded by race. In my eyes, a school system that is systemically racist systematically, is a school system that lacks both the basic awareness and the will to understand issues surrounding race. One example that I've seen frequently, aside from funding, which is what Ian explained, is the lack of enlightenment on issues explaining critical race theory. This is something that I've seen big in news, on podcasts, all of that stuff, especially within Southern states. By not teaching these topics, they're inherently choosing to turn a blind eye, and instead of enlightening young and impressionable students, they instead ban conversations that are so crucial to understanding how racial inequality and inequity are so often woven into society and negatively affects Black people, people of color, all of that. And in terms of your other question, I think that the dominance of white culture within schooling personally has led me, when I was younger, I kind of lost my self-identity because I really thought that being Black wasn't the norm, or it wasn't as important as being white, because that's all I saw in school. That's all I saw my teachers be. That's all I saw in history. But now I definitely understand the importance and I've tried to help preach that to other students who also feel the same way. I was reading statistics and it was saying like Black teachers, if you have a Black teacher in your lifetime as a Black student, you're 7% more likely to graduate high school and 13% more likely to enroll in college. And that's a really important aspect and demographic for me, because that's definitely something that I felt, having a Black teacher. That's really important. And it's something that we don't usually have, especially in these white communities and PWIs. So that's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Alana. So you mentioned, Alana, your youth, and Reverend Waller, you mentioned Eurocentrism. So I actually want to kind of build off of the question of how a dominantly white culture has impacted your school environment. And I want to ask how white culture has been enforced on students. So this will just be really a student-focused question, but I want to start with Namrta, if you could answer how a dominantly white culture has been enforced, or not enforced, or yeah, enforced and pushed upon in your academic environment.
Yeah, of course. And I would start with saying that in general, for me, growing up in a predominantly white area of the main line, white culture in general is so suffocating, you know, like and this looks like so many different things for me, but in general, I'm a very curious person. I like to learn, and history classes have been really hard for me because it's either US history or European history. I rarely see people who look like me, who have similar cultures to I, and even in ancient world history or world history, the focus is never cultures of color. It's usually, you know, Europeans. So that is a really big thing for me specifically that's been pushed onto me. But also, I would say that white culture has really taken over my narrative as a person of color. I no longer get to experience the things that I do want to experience. So, for example, I don't feel safe wearing my cultural clothing in school. So I have been conditioned to only wear Western clothing, like, you know, and that's a struggle for me because I don't feel always comfortable in that. And, you know, it's a common narrative that I hear stuff like this from my ethnic peers. So it's not just me who's struggling to push back against white culture. So in general, white culture is forced onto students because it's the norm. It's what society wants from us to conform to that. And unfortunately, I have done that. And it's only now that I've started the process of unlearning that behavior and finding safety in myself instead of my white peers.
Thank you, Namrta. And then another student, if you could pitch in, please. Alana, do you have anything else to say about this?
I definitely have something to say because I feel like it's really cliche. Everyone's always like, oh, we don't get to be taught about Black culture. It's always white culture, but it's so true. And it's so predominant within our schooling and within our education. And it has been made the norm. And it's something that we're just now starting to kind of break out of. I know in my school, we added 2 new courses. It was like Black politics and African-American literature. But it's not often that we see Black people or Black authors or really authors that are anything but white or history that's anything but white in these schools. And if it is, it's like one little subchapter of like a lesson. It's not predominant. And it's something that we really need to fix. White culture has always been the standard. It's always been, oh, this is what we're going to do, which is why we see so many sorry, is my dog running in, but why we see so many of the issues going on today, because people are not being educated about these issues, which then will lead to repeated history, which is something that we can't have, and it's not acceptable. And in order to break free of those different expectations and that outcome that we don't want of repeated history, we have to teach about these different things. And that's something that we have to focus on in these predominantly white institutions and in these schools, basically just implementing our history, whether it be Black history, whether it be Asian history, whether it be any other history. We just have to integrate these things into what we're learning. So yeah.
Thank you, Alana. Okay, so I'm going to switch up questions here. So along the lines of systemic racism in schools, what do you all have to say about those who don't believe in it? Why do we think there is so much pushback to transform school districts to be more diverse, inclusive, and equitable? And do you believe schools are less transparent about their work because of such pushback? I'd like to start with Reverend Waller. Oh, you're muted, Reverend Waller.
I'm the old man that doesn't know Zoom. I'm sorry. Thank you for that question. The reality is there's such pushback because there's a great fear. The great fear is that what has been normative, as I listen to you all, it hurts my heart that the same stuff that I grew up with, you're growing up with as well. When I mentioned I was from Shaker Heights is a pretty affluent middle-class neighborhood outside of Cleveland, much like the main line here. I grew up in what was considered one of the top 10 public school districts at the time. You're talking about the 70s now, but there was still the wealth gap, and there was still the education gap between white and Black students. So it's such a norm that to talk about it or seek to change it, we are saying to a group of people, we're tearing your world up, which is real. And so there are a lot of well-meaning white people and not so well-meaning white people who now see their world just falling apart, and they're not so sure what the new world is going to look like. And what we can't do is rescue them from that fear. Can't rescue. This world is going to change. It is no longer going to be the Eurocentric normative conversation that it has been. And quite frankly, we don't know what it's going to be, but we know it's going to be good and we know it's going to be better. But I think fear is a number one driver. That's why they don't want to talk about CRT. That's why they don't want to talk about systemic racism. One last point, systemic racism is a fundamental difference from just sort of personal preference. I like Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. That really speaks to it. The average white person, when you say racism, they think they're a good person, and what they think of racism is Bull Connor. And since they're not ignorant and Southern, they don't think they're racist. And so they feel attacked because their understanding of racism is the old stuff that Martin King and my father and them wrestled with. And what we're talking about is microaggressive and systemic issues. And it is offensive to them to hear that language. But we have to help them recognize we're not going to rescue you from the language. We're going to change together. It's going to be difficult, but it's going to happen. And ultimately, it's going to be good.
Thank you, Reverend Waller, for putting that so beautifully. Along the lines of fear, Ian, do you have anything else to add to this topic?
I agree with Reverend Waller on a lot of things, like about how he mentioned fear is a huge factor when it comes to obstructing this kind of change to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Because for so long since our country has been founded, whiteness has been the norm and white culture has been the norm. And no one wants to change that. No one wants to change the fact that no one, but more in particular, no white person wants to change that willingly. But like Reverend Waller said, fear is something we have to face, not something we have to run away from. And as he mentioned, we have to take this change. We have to be more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And I know it's a difficult change, and I know we're going to make mistakes along the way. But who doesn't make mistakes? Who hasn't had a huge change in their lives? And another thing is, there's a lot of talk about critical race theory, but not many people really understand what CRT is, or critical race theory. Basically, critical race theory is just a legal framework that is used to analyze how systems, how policies, laws, things like that contribute to a systemically racist society. Did I ever say that any one person is racist in this sentence? Not at all. So what we have to do is, first, we have to tell people that they're not personally racist, as in the Bull Connor type, KKK type, overt bigotry and racism. But what we do have to acknowledge is that we all have these implicit biases that ultimately contributes to systemic racism, as it shapes our perspectives on people of color.
Thank you, Ian. So I actually want to center this conversation back into the idea of pushback that schools kind of are receiving from, for example, bringing up ideas like critical race theory. And I want to ask Dr. Stevenson, how do you see a school overcoming this pushback? And how is Radnor, for example, overcoming this pushback?
Thank you. I think that when you ever are dealing with a new but not new topic, new in the sense that what we call it is, in my realm, repackaged. It continues the same way. The way that you address it is to be transparent about what your intentions are. So in Radnor, what we did is to approach the work of DEI was to bring forth with the board 2 years ago said that they wanted to push an initiative around DEI work. And what the board, what we would challenge with as a school district is, how do you bring that work forward to educate everyone across the board? Because as Pastor Waller said, a lot of this is talking about fear. And the other piece that I would coin on that, then you have to take fear and take that fear and then produce it with education. And so what we've done is we've worked towards organizing DEI parent committees. We did DEI student committees. We did DEI building-based committees for the staff. We also worked with a consultant that's coming in to talk about the frameworks of not just about looking at specific problems, but then building a foundation of what we call pillars. In the district that we put in pillars, number one is that we want to look at how do we look at it as a district, what type of curriculum that we're putting forward that every student, regardless of who walks from that door, feels that there's an inclusion piece there. So inclusion becomes a major theme for us. The second is, how do we look at this in the framework of recruiting and retention educators of color across the board of all pieces? The next one is, how do we look at it from the perspective of programming? What type of programming, what kind of speakers, what type of programs that we're bringing forth to make sure that it is reflective and inclusive across all boards? And then the final one is about engagement. How do we engage the conversation across all boards in this piece? Reverend Waller talks about coming up in Shaker Heights, in which I came in a polar opposite society in Marion, South Carolina, which was a southern poor county, one of the poorest in the country, and still is, where they didn't, in the 70s, they were not fighting segregation. Brown versus Board was passed in 55. They didn't segregate, they didn't desegregate where I grew up until 1976. And those things that continue to be a problem in my hometown is because there's been a lack of education. And what we are fortunate, and I hope that we would continue to do in our district and other districts across this area, is to use that platform of educating, not only from a historical perspective, but also in a current perspective about what it is that we need to do to bring folks to the table across all boards so everyone feels that they belong.
Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. So to wrap up this kind of question, I want to ask Hannah and Aïsatta, what does pushback to DEI look like from a student perspective? Have you seen teachers or administration push back at your schools? And if you have, how have you tackled that pushback? So I'd like to start off with Aïsatta, please.
Thanks, Anika. So I agree with what everyone has been saying. I think that the pushback mostly roots in racism itself. Racism is bold and in your face, and it lives in the heart of people who claim that they're not racist. Those people, I think, believe that creating an equitable environment for students of color will result in them or their children losing something, as if the safety of the safety and the confidence that lives in the hearts of students of color is not as important as the history books, or, for example, a student being admitted into a college over another. What I've done to fight it so far is I am a co-leader of the Young Activist Coalition at my school, and also a student representative of Anika's amazing group, CoSaTIDE. We recently had a meeting with our new superintendent to discuss the means of diversity, equity, and inclusion at our school, because our school has done such a poor job of tackling the situation. I think we've gotten far with that conversation, and we are looking forward to further action during the school year. But so far, we've had a lot of discussions like these, and honestly, I'm a bit tired of them. We do a lot of talking in Strath Haven. Strath Haven gives students tons of places to talk, tons of places to be vulnerable, but then when it comes to administrative action, they fall short. We usually make lists of requests. We make educational forums that we make public so that everyone can pop in and listen in. And usually our problem is getting people to engage. Not only people, getting administration at Strath Haven to engage. I think that a lot of the administrators don't really take student response into accountability when they're making large decisions. Like, for example, at Strath Haven, racism is not prohibited in our bullying policy. And since I'm a junior, since my freshman year, the Young Activist Coalition has been trying to get racism prohibited at our school, because it is important that students of color feel protected. And there should be something in our rule book that says you cannot be racist, so that when a situation does happen, because they happen often in Strath Haven, so that we'll be protected and other people will face the repercussions of their actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Aïsatta. You are an absolutely amazing activist, and you're inspiring to all of us. Hannah, would you like to take a jab at this question as well?
Yes, so I think the beginning of pushing DI curriculum, again, it starts with the students, since we're the ones immediately being affected by it. It is our level of comfort. And when we're not comfortable in those classrooms, nothing can be achieved and nothing can be changed. And I can say that from personal experience, I've had friends tell me that as they sit in roundtable discussions, discussing something that has to do with DEI, racism in the community, they're immediately shot down. And they're ridiculed by their peers. And this immediately creates an uncomfortable situation for them. So I think that is some of the pushback of DEI. It's not only in the staff members and in the whole school system, but it also starts from your peers. So to combat that, in my school, I've joined councils like Anika's CoSaTIDE to help push the message forward. I've also joined institutions or clubs like BSU, just to learn a little tidbits from everyone, but to also help my peers from my perspective understand what's going on. It's different being told from a teacher not to be racist, a parent not to be racist, or just a whole system or school system not to be racist. But I feel like when it's from someone at your level and you understand their experiences and you're hearing their experiences, that's more impactful. So that's what I'm trying to give to my friends and those around me, my classmates. Yes.
Thank you so much, Hannah. So now moving into our last question, I want to ask what we want to really see in our schools when we say we want a diverse, equitable, and inclusive school district, what do we envision? And how does that really look like? So starting off, we'll go back to Namrta since we haven't heard you in a while.
Thank you, Anika. So in my experience, the supervisors and board members that my school DEI group gets to speak with, they're not aware of what the situation is like for people of color. So I would say, first of all, that kind of transformation looks like putting people of color into those positions of power so that they can understand and actually actively help us out. You know, recently there was multiple staff openings at Conestoga High School because women of color were leaving, and all of those positions were filled by white staff. So that's just an example of how, as a person of color, I am losing allies, people that I can talk to, because they don't necessarily feel safe in this space. So not only is that damaging for me as a student, but our entire student body loses out on a piece of and a person of color who can provide a different experience than the norm. I also think that trainings should be mandatory for all staff and students. Last year, my DEI group put together one teacher training throughout the entire year because of the pandemic and stuff, but that's not enough. Like 5 or 6 overworked seniors are not enough to educate an entire student body, and it's also not our job. We need a whole staff of people behind us helping us educate, because that's what the first step to a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive school district is. We need that push, and it can't just come from the students. It needs to come from someone above us. And I know that these are a lot of, you know, big requests, big transformations, but as someone who has diligently worked to get even the little bit of change and budging of training that I've seen so far, I know that they're big, and that's why I'll stick with those two for right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Namrta. Alana, I know you're a big activist at Lower Merion as well, so do you have anything to add to Namrta's statement?
I completely agree with the whole idea of hiring a more diverse staff. I shared demographics previously, how Black students can be affected by having Black teachers, Black people around them. And as a student right now, I've been in a few courses that were giving like a spotlight onto African-American history, African-American literature, all of that. But even in those classes, I have not had a Black teacher. They've both been taught by a white teacher, which is what I thought was really interesting. And especially when you try and find comfort in those classes, and when you try and find like a space where you can finally be you expect to have a Black teacher or somebody that can understand what you're going through. And I completely agree with what was said. We need to hire more Black people. We need to hire more people of color. We need to hire more women. We need to hire all of these things, because right now I think most of my teachers have been white and male. And I feel like a lot of people can agree with that. A lot of people can relate to that as well. And it's not something that should be the norm anymore. We need to break free of that whole idea. We need to understand that a lot of students can't thrive just having one race as a teacher, people that they can't sympathize with, can't agree with, all that stuff. So I think that we need to definitely implement different things into the school system, hire more Black and brown and just a diverse, like, teaching staff. I don't know what else I can say. Like, that's definitely what I've been focusing on as far as being a student at a school that's predominantly white. So.
No, definitely, Alana. That's the foundation from which you work up on. Reverend Waller, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thank you. And thank all of you for your contribution to this conversation. This has been so good for me, and I appreciate you. If I were having this conversation in Philadelphia, I would be talking about funding. But because we're having this conversation out here, it's not an issue of funding. This is an issue of equity and hiring practices beyond tokenism. Because if you only have one or two Black teachers, it's going to be really hard for them even to speak up and represent. We celebrate those that do, but we really need, we need two things. We need different hiring practices to diversify the staff, not only the teaching staff, but the administrative staff. And then what I celebrate about this conversation are the number of churches that are involved. And I know that there's a fear of church and state and so forth, but to really connect with the Black community, you have to take seriously the Black church. And if we're really serious about having a conversation and making some systemic changes in any context, having a dynamic relationship with the Black churches in that area, I would like to see, without fear of sort of the evangelical side of it. That's a whole other conversation. And that's what I think ultimately, and then doing more of this. I am so encouraged by this conversation. I wish I would have seen in this panel a young Black boy in the conversation, because I fear that America is heading towards getting rid of specifically young Black boys. And so I am a proponent, and I celebrate everyone that is here. But I think that there are unique challenges to what it means. We're not suggesting that any other perspective is not difficult, but there is a unique challenge to being young, Black, and male, particularly on the main line at this time, that we should pay attention to.
Thank you, Reverend Waller, for bringing up that point. So I'm going to move on into more of a student perspective and we'll start with you, Ian. The question is, what support mechanisms, and I know we've already touched on this, but what support mechanisms do you need in place to develop a diverse student curriculum? And given that you are an activist within the school, what support mechanisms are really needed in schools to amplify minority voices? And like Reverend Waller said, Black boys' voices.
So one thing that a lot of us students stress a lot about is the curriculum. And the curriculum right now, it's still mostly white, Eurocentric, and those kinds of courses take up the honors and AP levels. And I also heard that some schools are starting to include diverse histories like African American history, Asian history, Latina history, but it seems to me that all those kinds of courses are just electives, like optional courses, not like part of the main curriculum or courses where you can get honors and AP classes. So in this regard, even if someone wants to learn the history of people of color, it's still not going to be like beneficial to them in terms of academics, because so far they don't get honors and AP credits, which when applying to colleges, what colleges would like to see. And second, I think Aïsatta said this before, but schools really need to prohibit racism, just like they prohibit bullying and vandalism. Like our school, Radnor, and many other schools, they hold a lot of seminars about bullying, about vandalism, about school safety, about what happens should a fire drill or severe water drill happen, but not so much on racism. And we need these kinds of seminars so that we know that not only racism exists, but it's a systemic issue that all of us need to address. And lastly, in those anti-racist seminars, we should like we should just talk about implicit biases, because a lot of people have, all of us has implicit biases, and that contributes, at least in part, to systemic racism. So we need to recognize that we all have these biases, and that what we have to do is to challenge these biases whenever it comes to like decision making. And we also have to encourage people to call out racism whenever it happens, including microaggressions.
So we have about 5 minutes left. I'm just keeping time for everybody, just so we're aware.
Thank you. And thank you, Ian. So Hannah, you go to the same school as Ian. We all go to Radnor. So do you have anything else to add?
Well, I'd honestly just like to emphasize what Ian said. Moments like this need to be normalized in schools. Instead of normalizing the silence in classrooms and like the uncomforting classrooms, because we've all dealt with that, this speaking up should be normalized, like advocating for yourself should be normalized. And I wanted to touch on a question someone asked a while ago in the chat, as if you put students of color in positions of power at school or in like leadership positions, won't they just be silent? I don't think that's the case. It takes one person, seeing that one person in a position that you would like to be in, it takes one, and then it starts like the domino effect. So at least for me, I would say seeing a student or a student of color and maybe as my class president, it makes me say, oh, okay, well, that's great. So let me try the next time. I think it's a domino effect. I don't think that that there'll be silence, because I think all of us have words that we feel the need to say, and they're kind of like bubbling up in our system. And when you're in an area that doesn't really accept what you feel, then yes, you're silenced. But being put on that podium, that helps. Having like the power behind you, that also helps. So also like what Namrta said is that we students can start something, but having the power behind us, that really helps to catapult it and push it forward. So that, yes.
That was beautifully said, Hannah. And so to wrap up our panelist discussion, I'm going to ask a question to Dr. Stevenson, and that'll be how are teachers and administrators at Radnor being trained to really cultivate diverse leaders, or diverse student leaders, I should really say?
Well, going back to what I said earlier, our goal has always been to produce opportunities for voice and for opportunities for growth across the board. And so what we've done in this year is in year 2 of our DEI program, is that we have partnered with a consultant group who's this year we'll do trainings for our staff. In August, we had a district-wide staff training for DEI work. We will continue that work with monthly leadership. Each building has a DEI team, and that trainer will work with them around the work, around curriculum, around programming, around understanding of how to address a lot of the things that were discussed today and beyond. We will have ongoing professional development for our parents in the community for the engagement piece. But importantly, we also have something that's been going on before we started our DEI initiative, and that is we've had one of our alumni who is an ABC graduate, Mubarak Lawrence, who has been meeting with student leaders at the high school. And we've also started last year and want to expand at the middle school, again, is to engage those conversations across the board, but not just have those conversations as a precursor, but to really have a layered approach to how do you build on those foundations that you want to do to see growth and understanding around the topics of DEI.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. And I think that gets us right in time to break out into discussion rooms. So I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Minakazi.
All right, thank you. The next thing that we're going to do is just take a break for a couple of minutes and just have a brief intermission so people can get more coffee, whatever your morning beverage is. and just for 3 minutes, and also just have a little bit of reflection time to process all of the amazing insights and opinions and views that we've heard so far, and then we'll go into the breakout rooms. So I'll just put up this screen for having our intermission. Those are our other screens. And also during the intermission, if you would like to donate to the Community Breakfast Collaborative, please do. You can go to the website. Thank you, and we'll see you back here at 9:35. Okay, it's 9:35, and we will continue with part 2. And I think Professor Chambers, you may have some things that you want to say about this.
I want to mention to everyone that this is a conversation that is meant to be constructive. It is one that is meant to be edifying. Also, facilitators, you might want to be cognizant of the fact that people might have come into the previous conversation at different points. And so everyone, as you're entering your breakout rooms, be considerate of one another. Don't spend the time recapping everything that was just said. It really is an opportunity for us to put more on the table about what was shared. And so if you have been part of the large conversation, put something on the table for others to repeat, build on. And Anne has on the screen the diagram showing you what to click when going into the breakout room for these constructive, compassionate conversations when that comes up on the screen.
Okay, thank you. You should have the note on your screen to join your breakout room. And we'll be in breakout rooms for about 30 minutes. I think we have everybody back to the main room now. So Professor Chambers is going to walk us through the next steps, which would be closing remarks of the moderator and panelists, and then Professor Chambers' closing remarks for the program.
Thanks everybody so much for participating in those breakout rooms. Really, I'm doing the baton again. I'm going to be handing over to Anika to talk with the panelists about their experiences with the breakout rooms. So thanks so much, and Anika.
Thank you, Professor Chambers. So we actually did not get to hear from Aïsatta last time when we were closing the panelist discussions. So if Aïsatta, you could start with the closing remarks and just talk about how your breakout room session went, that would be great. Oh, there you are. Perfect. Okay.
Thank you, Anika. Sorry, I just unmuted myself. Thank you so much for that. Our breakout room went phenomenally. We discussed a lot of the things that are happening in school districts along with workspaces. And we also discussed basically the history of equity in people's communities. I learned a lot. And I thank everyone who was in my breakout room for sharing and being vulnerable with me. I also wanted to thank everyone for coming and discussing, and I wanted to thank all the panelists for their vulnerability. I'd like to encourage everybody to maybe think about something they can go home with to reflect on. I personally heard something really cool in my breakout room. Mr. Dave, sorry, I don't know your last name, but Mr. Dave said something cool. He said 1 + 1 should equal 3, not 1 - 1 equaling 0, in reference to people being scared that they'd lose something if we go on to achieve equity in our communities, districts, and workplaces. I thought that was really powerful, and it's really going to stick with me. So I appreciate you for saying that. And I thank everyone for coming, and thanks.
Thank you, Aïsatta. We'll move on to Hannah, if you have any closing remarks. And I'll pin you too. There we go.
So in my breakout room, we talked about equity, race relations, and multicultural education, and it had some very open and honest and passionate responses, which I really appreciate from everyone that was there. And I truly want to thank all of you for joining this morning. And honestly, every moment that you all learned more from me and my peers, I've also gained more knowledge from every adult on this call. So today has truly been a learning experience for me. And I'm really glad to know that it was the same for you all. So thank you again.
Thank you, Hannah. So next we'll move to Reverend Waller.
So wait a minute. There we go.
You're on mute.
Yep, I got it. All right, here we go. I am so grateful to have been a part of this conversation, and I thank the organizers for including me and allowing my voice to be a part. I am encouraged. One of the things that I talked about Shaker Heights when I introduced myself, because that was a bubble, but it was a bubble that I enjoyed and that was inclusive, and that reminds me of what this could be. My bubble was broken at an early age, and I found out what the real world outside of Shaker Heights was like. And I've been fighting to get back to Shaker. And I believe that we're going to do it. And so with everything that's going on, things like today, moments like today, remind me that we're going to get there. And all of this work is worth it. And I celebrate you for doing it.
Thank you, Reverend Waller. Next, we'll move to Namrta.
Yeah, hi. I just want to say that our group discussion was amazing, and I want to thank everyone for staying engaged with us. We talked a bit about how the racism and trauma from our younger schools affects our everything about the quote unquote real world in terms of politics, education, and higher schooling and in general. I want to thank you for being great white allies. It means a lot to me as a person of color. And in general, this forum is a great way for us to share our experiences and for us to start this important conversation. So I want to thank everyone, and thank you, Pastor, for being my ally in our group. It was a great addition. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Anika.
Thank you, Namrta. Okay, so we'll move on to Ian, but Ian, I can't actually find you on the Zoom screen, so you'll have to speak first before I pin you.
Yeah, so anyways, in our breakout room, we discussed about the curriculum and how like we can bridge these gaps in terms of trying to come together as a community to address these issues. Like there is one participant who talked about how she went into another forum, and how when a personal narrative of a Black boy shared his experiences, and he talked about how the quote unquote the American flag does not truly represent me, and how he was immediately called un-American, and that kind of notion of un-American never really sat well with me, because I think learning about racism and taking the steps to correct it is actually pro-American. It's actually for America, because it enables this country to become a better country and to live closer to its values of democracy, opportunity for all, equality, and etc. And before I close off, I'd like to say thank you everyone who showed up, because I think just showing up is already a really huge step towards progress towards ending racism and fostering a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive school environments. So thank you all.
Thank you, Ian. So now we'll move on to Alana.
All right. So in our group, our breakout room, we mostly focused on the importance of hiring different and diverse staffing and the different pillars of education. And yeah, basically all of that, education as a whole, and how we can do a better job of representing the different groups within those different educational curriculums. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's like a majority of what we talked about. I know we've all been on here for a while, so I was gonna like try and keep it short. But I do also want to thank everybody for coming as well. It means a lot. It's a Wednesday morning. I know a lot of people have a lot of things that they could be doing right now, but you guys are all right here, and that means a lot. Thank you for participating in the conversation as well, because these things need to be talked about, and I know it's been talked about a lot, but still bringing more attention to these issues is still a large part of creating a change. So thank you.
Thank you, Alana. And last but not least, for our panelists, Dr. Stevenson.
Thank you. I just want to thank everyone for coming. Alana was in my group, so she covered everything that our group said. I want to say that for the young folks, thank you for taking a leadership in this conversation. As a person who grew up in a society in South Carolina where when I was this age, this was not an option because social segregation was still enforced in a social context, that I am encouraged and happy to know that folks here, the young folks, are leading in these conversations to bring constant unification, but also bring attention to the needs across the board in our communities, in our schools, in our society, to address the shortcomings that we need to move forward in a positive way. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. And so I will be doing the last closing remarks. And I wanted to start off by thanking everyone who is here. And I wanted to also thank Ms. Minakazi and all of those who have been arranging and working to arrange this event for months now. This was a really amazing opportunity for all of us. And I'm really, really, really fortunate to have been on this call and learned so much. Now, to what our breakout room discussed, our breakout room covered a lot in the 30 minutes that we had. We talked about representation and funding, but something that really resonated with me was a quote that actually Ms. Davis quoted from one of the panelists. Unfortunately, we don't know which panelist said it, but the quote was that an entire community loses out when this is not, when diversity, equity, and inclusion and diversifying these curriculums are not really included. And I think that is a very valuable thing to be taking away and kind of putting out to all of our schools. And I think it's something that is often overlooked in these discussions. The idea that it not only benefits people of color, but it also benefits white people as well. It benefits everybody. And I hope that is one of the key takeaways that everyone takes away from this event. But I did want to thank everyone once again. And it was amazing talking to the people that I did talk to. Thank you.
We're going to turn it over to Professor Chambers for our closing remarks. And we have just a few PowerPoint slides of the upcoming events that we're going to walk through as well as he takes us through to the end of the program.
Thanks, Ann. I just want to repeat to everybody the scripture that I said at the beginning in 1 Timothy 4:12 that says, don't let anyone think less of you because you are young. Be an example to all in what you say, in the way you live your life, in your faith. I just can't say enough about how proud I am to be connected to the young people who organized this, facilitated this, and represented the mainline community, themselves, their families, and these organizations so well. The Community Breakfast Collaborative is an organization that exists. We want to make sure that we connect you with others. So reach out to us to help you connect to others. Next, you are going to receive a program recording after this event is done. So it's being recorded now. You, by registering and being a part of this, are going to get a recording of this event. So we want you to know that that's one of the next things that's happening and one of the things you get. Also, there are 2 additional events that are follow-ups to this. One is in January, one is in April. So save the dates. The January 26, 2022 event is at 7 o'clock in the evening. It's called Family Voices on Manifesting the Beloved Community in Schools, where more parents and family members and community members will be in the discussion, not just them, but more of them. And then on Wednesday, April 27th at 7, we're having an event that's a community event, dialogue via art making, creating art as a community so that we can express many of the sentiments that we feel through art, not just words. And art includes music, painting, construction of things. Our organization last year worked with anti-violence as the theme, and we've always created the installation on Villanova's campus that honors those who died by gun violence. But being artistic as a way to express beyond words is something we want to encourage people to do. It's not just about the talk. The young people are letting us know. And next year's Undoing Racism Day is going to be on September 21st, 2022. So this event is already scheduled for next year. And is this year 11 or year 12?
This is year 11, so next year will be the 12th year.
And the format, whether we're virtual or in person, is to be determined. We're hoping we're going to be in the room that Anna already has reserved at Villanova, having breakfast with one another, literally. We do eat. And that's September 21st, 2022.
Okay.
Donations can be sent using our community breakfast Weebly and also through the mail, P.O. Box 135, Villanova, PA 19085. And I want you to really do what you can to support CoSaTIDE, the Council of Students Advocating for Transparency, Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. These young people deserve to be supported, encouraged, as they are encouraging and supporting us. It can't be all on them. We as adults, professionals, have to do our part. We have to do our part and find the energy and inspiration from them, but use the resources, the money, the wisdom that we have, and the relationships that we have to do our part. So much, I just wanted to also say that I've gotten so much language out of this conversation. I'm an English professor, so words are my thing. And Kenneth Burke says words are equipment for living. I've gotten some good equipment for living today. And I've also gotten insights about respecting silence and not assuming I know why someone's being silent. But I've also gotten inspiration to link with someone who might be quiet, trying to find words. And I know that when I speak up, I might be inspiring someone who's been silent to speak up as well. So I'll end at that. I'm going to turn it back over to our Community Breakfast Collaborative President, Ann Minicozy.
I'm just bringing it back to this full screen here so we can all see each other, hopefully. And thank everybody for coming. And as Professor Chambers said, we're going to meet again in January. We're going to meet in April in a creative way, and then again next September. So thank you all very much for coming. Stay tuned to the emails, and we'll get the recording out to you as soon as we can. Thank you so much for joining, and enjoy the day. Take care, everyone.